Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Prof. Charles Stirton with us this morning. Charles is a retired but active botanist, interested in legumes, invasive weeds, hybrid, and citizen science. He has held positions of, and ladies and gentlemen, please hold on to your seats. He has been founder and director and CEO of the National Botanic Garden of Wales, deputy director and director of science at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, and chief professional officer at the Botanic Research Institute of South Africa. He's been associate professor at the University of Natal, Pietermaritzburg, and currently an honorary research associate at the University of Cape Town. He is the author of 5 books and 140 scientific publications. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what to say to that. And this is just the shortened version of the CV. Otherwise, if we were to sit here and go through all the accomplishments, Prof would literally stay here the whole day. But thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. What an honor and what an opportunity to have you with us. We are so excited about this talk and we're looking forward to just learning more. Ladies and gentlemen, I will catch up with you guys on the other side of the presentation. But for now, please sit down, relax, and brace yourself for a fantastic presentation. Prof, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's terrific to hear people from so many parts of the world. The fact that we could do it over Zoom and the chances of us all meeting together in the traditional way is so remote. This is actually one of the few benefits of COVID. Today, I want to give you an introduction to legumes. I have a number of main purposes. The one is I want to enthuse, encourage, and also to see what the next steps, particularly my focus throughout the talk is going to be on the contribution that non-scientists, who are often called citizen scientists or naturalists, can make towards science. I think that has been a fabulous thing. So the theme that runs through my talk is going to be about that. I'm going to indicate what's the area we're going to look at. I'm then going to look at some of the diversity of the peas in the region, a bit about habitats and distribution, about pollinators. I'll go into fire, which is very important in this region, and seedlings, relationship with soil, plants, and bacteria, briefly about hybridization, not much on economic botany or taxonomy, because you would be here for 4 or 5 days if I just covered some of those in detail. A bit about invasive species, how all this connects, and then a few stories about discovering new and forgotten species. So if we start, the area we are looking at, basically, this is Southern Africa. These are all the biomes, and we're looking at this area, which is the Core Cape area, the Cape Core Flora, and this area here, which is the Extra Cape Flora. And you can see quite a lot of diverse habitats in these biomes. Let's look first at this area. This is taken from this wonderful book called The Plants of the Greater Cape Floristic Region. There are 43 genera and 764 species of legumes. It's the second largest family after the daisies. If we go look at the next region, the Greater Cape Floristic region, that's the area to the north and east, there are fewer genera and species, 27 genera, 140 species, and it's now only the 6th largest family. Interesting enough, which we're not looking at, is the Eastern Cape also is the 2nd largest family, the pea family. Which all goes to show how rich this region is. This slide just shows you something about the diversity. I've only taken one species from about a third of the genera. And just that gives you a display of the diversity in flowers, structure, and so on. It's a small sample. One of the largest genera in the Cape Core region, and they do extend up into the other area, are Aspalathus. And I'm showing you the pictures, not in the traditional way of showing you the front of the picture, which most of the pictures on iNaturalist show, because here there are so many key characters you can see in the size of a flower. The relationship of the keels to the petals, whether it's hairy on the back and hairy on the petals, and whether it has bracts and bracteoles. So anyone who wants to take pictures of legumes, please always include a close-up of a flower. What's traditionally done, and you will see, as I mentioned each one here, these are people who are currently working on this genus, molecular and taxonomy. This is the standard way people photograph, except you never get such a good close-up as this. But this shows that I've chosen samples that are somewhat different. Normally, they look fairly similar. I just posed this question, that's a dimple. I have no idea what its function is, but there are a whole group of them that have it. Something that is not often looked at is flower color changes. People will take a picture of a flower and they will then take a separate picture of maybe a different flower color. But one of the things about a lot of the Cape legumes is as the flowers age, they tend to change their color. So that's something that anyone can record. And I went through the whole of iNaturalist, and these were about most of the pictures I could find that showed flower color. But in the field, I know that many of them have changed color. Another very large genus is Indigofera, currently being worked on by Brian Dupree for his PhD. But it's been worked on by Brian Schrerer for well over 10, 15 years. It's a very large genus. And even the group that's restricted to the Cape is almost probably well over 100 species. Very diverse. You'll notice in the field often the staminal column is always sticking up. And that is because a lot of the wings have, this is a keel, and they have these spurs, and then the wing petal sits over that. So there is the wing, and there's the keel, and that's being tripped. And that means a pollinator comes, will not visit that flower again, but it's still adding to the attractive. And these petals normally just fall off, but the standard usually stays there. This is a genus that I'm working on. Most people know it as blue-flowered Ceralias, but as you can see from this picture, true blue is rather rare in this genus, but they range from white flowers all the way through to almost green and lemony green, with a great diverse in structure. And then you get species like this, which almost mimic podalirias, like that one there. Another genus, I'm just going to switch this off. Another genus is Athlobium, and this is a group that I'm monographing. As I get to finish the monograph, people keep finding new species. So there's got to be a stop. Fortunately, there haven't been too many in the last few years. But you can see here, great diversity in color, leaves, and also flowers. Another large genus is Lotinonis. This was summarized by Ben Erik van Wyk for his doctorate and then published, and you can see the publication here. That genus that he treated then has now been broken up into 3 or 4 other genera, and he's currently still working on that. The only publication we rarely have that's of useful to most people trying to name things is this publication. But once again, great variety of shape, variation in color, and leaves. Podalyria has been monographed by Annelies Kutter-Flock, and you can see the flowers are more or less the same, but if you look carefully, there's a lot of variation in the patterning, the shapes, and how particularly the wings display. A little bit about habitats. These are, I just want to show you the next 3 slides, very much how the sort of places that we have visited and where legumes grow. These are areas mostly with aspalathus, but we've been to many, many parts of South Africa. In fact, we've been to most parts in the region where we're talking about. Some we've been to because we like going there. We never seem to cease finding things. And some areas are still rather poorly visited. For example, the northern bits of Tulbagh, the Anesberg, some like the Gedo Pass, everybody ever goes up there always collects in this area. So that's quite well known. But I will show you a plant which is just about to be described that grows on that hillside and nobody's collected it before. And then I'll talk a bit about Tulbagh Waterfall and what is and what isn't there. Van Rains Pass, parts of that is still rather poorly collected. Well, what about the distribution of legumes globally? Here you see a map taken from the Global Information Facility, showing the number of specimens that have been recorded so far. Not all legume specimens have been entered into it, but as this map will slowly change over time. But it already shows some interesting trends. On the red, you can see large numbers of specimens, particularly in the northern institutions. A lot of collecting. A lot of this collecting was done by European institutions and sit inside European institutions, often millions of specimens. But that shows 2 real activity centers in South Africa. What about historically? If we go back and have a, I'll get rid of this. If you go back historically and you look at the number of specimens between 1600 and 1836, there weren't a lot, mostly centered around this area and early explorers. But by the time William Harvey did Flora capensis, you can see there were a few more. And then slowly collecting was intensified, mostly in the southwestern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and a bit further north. And then by, sorry, I've got a screen that's showing here and I cannot get rid of it. Maybe somebody can, anyway. This is an interesting map because it shows the number of threatened plant species in South Africa, approximately in 25 by 25 kilometer degree squares. And you can see most of the threatened species in South Africa, either critically endangered, or vulnerable, are sitting in the southwestern Cape. The green shows mostly fynbos vegetation, and then the black bit are protected areas that are World Heritage Sites, and the gray bit are protected areas, mostly mountainous. Remember this map, because we're going to look at it in terms of alien species and bees. Main pollinators for legumes in the Cape are bees, and you range from the very large xylocopid bees, which are equivalent of big bumblebees in other parts of the world, and into smaller bees. And these flowers here are about 5 or 6 millimeters long, so it gives you an idea how small some of those flowers are. The distribution of bees is very interesting. This was based on a study by Kuhlman, and you can see the distribution of bees that looking at 645 species in 56 genera, and this is the distribution pattern. But most interesting is the concentration over here of the largest numbers of bees. And that just parallels the first few slides I showed you of the region we're looking at, where there are very high numbers of legume species. I really got interested in pollination very early in my career. And once on one of the field trips, we had a very hot day in the river, and I was cooling off in the stream, sitting like Canuti on a chair, drinking some red wine, and played the philosophical bee and wondered how were the bees actually visiting the flowers. And so I was having hooks and various scenarios. And I postulated there might be something for bees to hang on. Well, bees have, a lot of them have hooks on their feet. And so later on, I was naming some specimens and I came across some legumes that had structures like this. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll do a little survey of the bees. And I found that there were four major patterns. You had these crescent-shaped scallop, then you had scallops with sort of like raised ridges, and then the scallops disappeared and you just got the ridges, and then the ridges disappeared into pockets. And this is just a sample of a diversity of legumes from around the world. I looked at Aspalathus and Wyborgia, and in Aspalathus, the standard form are these open pockets, and then they gradually reduce, open sculpturing patterns, and they gradually reduce into pockets. And this happens in a number of lines. Some, the whole group has those, as you can see there and there. So that's the evolutionary pattern in 390 species of Aspalathus. But what about in a genus? Is there any variations? I looked at Wyborgia, which has a very characteristic flower, and you could actually do a key out to all the species just based on those wing patterns. Really interesting. People don't really associate legumes with butterflies. And here you see some pictures. I've come across it quite commonly in the veld. And I think this is something that people should look at. There are pictures of butterflies on iNaturalist and other social websites, but they don't usually show the plant being visited. And I think that's something we can do, because we can start building up a picture of butterfly distributions as well as legume distributions and look for correlations. And one of the reasons that legumes are important is that they always summon flower, and that provides a steady nectar source for butterflies. Many of them, of course, lay their eggs on legumes and go through the life cycle. Here's a surprise that I'm not going to go to a lot of biotic associations with legumes, but something that really surprised me was digging up Indigofera superba to get root nodules. This is a species I described at Hermanus, where there were only about 5 or 6 individuals, and I said it was highly threatened until Ian Williams phoned me about 5 years after publication and said, you know that rare species? Well, you're pleased to know there are thousands that have come up after the fire, so it just goes to show. These are aphids on roots underground. I've never come across that before, and I've subsequently seen it in 4 or 5 times. So that's something that needs to be looked at. There are a whole range of aphids on legumes, and there are these things called membracids, which are tree hoppers. And here's one on Sorelia pinnata, and here's one on Athlobium. Many legumes also have secretory glands, and you often find ants sipping the nectar. And even mice have been recorded. And these remarkable pictures taken by Colin Ralston, who lives in George, and they show the mouse eating the flower. Whether they sip the nectar on the flower is hard to say, but they certainly eat the seeds. the Cape spiny mouse, in this interesting work done by Jeremy Midgley and his students, show rodent pollination in Liberia, which is a proteoid looking flower, as you can see here. And that was reputed to be the first case of rodent pollination in legumes. But I think what John Rawson has found is probably more widespread than we think. What about role of fire? Fire is critical to legumes because if you had to look at a curve of legumes, you would find that after a fire, maybe 50 to 60% of all the legume species that will occur in that habitat will have completed their life cycle within 5 years, with a few that become more dominant as bigger shrubs and even small treelets. The longer the fire is kept out of the area. These are two fires I witnessed, once in the Cedarburg in 2008, and it virtually got rid of all the forestry buildings. It swept over the whole region. And here's a fire just above the University of Cape Town, which didn't quite get onto the campus in 2009. And one just has to reflect on the huge fire that's happened quite recently, a very tragic fire. And the university had to be evacuated. And worryingly, crucial collections like the oldest herbarium in South Africa and one of the oldest botanical libraries came pretty close to being burnt, but fortunately they were saved. And even the science buildings at Kirstenbosch were threatened. Just shows how tenuous living in fire climax zones are. And we really need to protect all our things. So unlike in Brazil, where one of the national museums lost vast collections of their natural history and ethnological collections. There are two responses to fire in the legumes. There are resprouters, and here you see some pictures of Rust and Freda with some mature Athlobiums, lucens, a recently described species. It's one of the first things that come up after the fire, especially after asparagus, which is normally the first by margin. And it's very fleshy, broad leaves, but as the plants age, and this is about 10 years after the fire, you see the plant looks very unlike. In fact, people thought they were separate species, and this is quite common. You find it in Podalyria, that the shapes, leaves of the plants look completely different from mature plants. Here's an example of a reseeder, which is another response. So all the plants die back. The seed is, as the plants mature over 10, 15 years, they send seed into the seed bank. And then after fire, you get a massive seedlings, as you see over here. This is a very attractive species. And you can see it's huge trusses of flowers. In fact, it's called the blue weeping broom, and it's widely sold in California, but it's rare to see it in gardens in South Africa. And it grows up to 4 or 5 meters. It's pretty spectacular when it's mature. And the smell goes right down through the valley. The name Fleta comes from the weeping, not only the weeping of the plant, but I was traveling through when I first saw it, and the sun was behind it, and a friend who was with me said, "Oh, I could weep." And Fleta means weeping. Seedlings come up, and they're quite broadleaf seedlings. They form a mound, and this mound grows up to about 0.5 meter. And what it's doing is building a fantastic root system that goes right down to get the tap water. Because as the season dries out, a lot of the plants sort of die back or they slow their growth. But this thing goes all through the summer. And it ends up with a single leaflet. So you go from multiple leaflets into a single leaflet. And that becomes a drought adaptation, no doubt. That got me interested in looking at seedlings, and here are 2 genera. So this is something anyone can do in their back garden. I grew all these in a small greenhouse of my host Anne Bean, where I used to stay when I came to Cape Town, and thanks to them. And you will see that the two genera are easily separated. So that's Aurelia and that's Athlobium. And just on a simple character like whether the epicotyle, which is this area between the cotyledons and the first leaflets, is hairless, whereas always hairy in this one. An example of each, they're the seedlings coming up of Aurelia and Swaviolens, and you can see it starts off with 3 leaflets. Slowly the numbers increase and it eventually gets up to 12 to 15 leaflets. Athlobium, you can see the hairy epicotyle, never produces more than 3 leaflets, and the leaflet shape tends to be quite different. Just a small thing about legume distributions and the relationship to soils and bacteria. Legumes nodulate and they produce nodules which are then filled with bacteria which provide the nitrogen in a mutualistic relationship. Well, one of our PhD students at the University of Cape Town did a survey of the Cape Peninsula, and he asked the question, do soil factors influence legume species distribution in the Cape Peninsula? Because we had noticed different clumpings. And what are the key indicator species for these different assemblages? And you can see that from his study, they fell into 2 groups, on sandstone and in granite shale. And he concluded that the Cape Peninsula, the soils are very heterogeneous and edaphically distinct. Habitats have very discrete legume assemblages, and these can be indicated by certain indicator species. And interestingly enough, although a lot of the sandstone areas are very low in phosphorus, the key clay parameters were iron, potassium, sulfur, and zinc. Here you see some examples of, it's a very busy slide, ignore on what's on the left. Those are just references. So anyone after this talk who wants to follow up any of them of these can. There's 3 major types. You've got these round ones, which are determinate, which just means they don't expand like the indeterminate ones which branch out. But you can see there's a real pattern. The different tribes and different groups have quite different approaches to having different types of root nodules. Here you can see some on Aurelia. The next study was to look at these different rhizobias, and 5 were studied, and the idea was to reconstruct the ancestral relationships that were found in the Cape core legumes. What was found that Burkholderia here, represented by this dot, was the most primitive species, and the other ones came in much later. And this is a timeline here, so you can see. And once again, some of the groups like the Podolerias and the Cyclopias have Burkholderia, Indigofera, they have Burkholderias, but they also have some of the others. The Soreli almost entirely have these ones here. So there's been a lot of diversification between the legumes and their symbionts. This study highlights the potential role of the legume rhizobia interaction to the high diversity of legumes in the Cape. And also these different bacteria were exchanging genes as well. And the question is, do all the introduced ones that came into agriculture, do they also exchange genes with the indigenous species? I'm not going to say much about hybridization, but just to say that if you're on the Cape Peninsula and you see something that isn't either a Sorelia pinnata or a Sorelia aculeata, which are quite distinct in the 2 major shrubs on the peninsula, and it looks something like that, it's a hybrid. It's a perfect intermediate between the 2, and it occurs quite commonly on the Cape Peninsula. If you go further north to the Paces Pass, anyone who asks me to name anything from there is normally in for a surprise because it's usually a hybrid. What happens there, you've got two species, Soralia aureopola, which hasn't been described yet, and Soralia intensa, which has, and they hybridize, and the hybrids back cross to the parents, and sometimes they cross amongst themselves. So you get a huge range. If you stand on a rock there, every plant you see is virtually different in that population. The same thing happens in the Swartberg Mountains. So anyone going up the Swartberg Pass, if you're collecting a Soralia more than 50 meters from the road, it's almost certainly going to be a hybrid. And those are the ones everyone wants to get a name. And of course, they can't get a name except a hybrid name. If anyone wants to see how we did that, have a look at this paper here. I'm not going to say much about the uses of legumes, but I will refer briefly to drink and beverages. But you can see there's a lot of uses, and anyone interested in that, do go and have a look at this paper by Prof. Ben Eric van Wyk. It's a really, really comprehensive paper, a really, really well-researched paper. And he's also written a lot of books on useful and economic plants in Southern Africa, which are available as books, really recommended. I'll just briefly say there are the three main genera, the two main genera for drinks are Aspalathus, which you see on the right, and Cyclopia. And you see they tend to be these somewhat spiny ones. And Ben Eric and a colleague also wrote a history on the ethnobotany of Cape herbal teas, which tells you all the stories behind this and evidence-based. It's also another interesting paper. This is what honeybush tea looks like. That's to show some variation. Some very beautiful ones growing up in the Swartberg, and then you get some on the more coastal areas. And Alistair Potts and a number of his colleagues have been doing a lot of work on honeybush tea. I just want to highlight one point. There are so many surprises, and this one really surprised me. Cyclopia, like low nutrient fynbos soils, normally quite low in phosphorus. And so they're highly dependent on the rhizobium bacteria to provide nutrients and nitrogen. But when they did a survey during the wet season, these are all the active different groups of bacteria involved. But in the dry season, completely different pattern. Now, what are the implications of this for commercial and for conservation purposes? And this is about the only study that's been done on this basis, something that should be further looked at. Redbush tea is also very common, and most people have tasted it or know about it. And I just want to highlight another point. What's called redbush tea actually has quite a number of different forms. And in this study, which was done on this area here, and you can see that when you do a close-up of it, there's erect forms, prostrate forms, erect and prostrate forms, shrubs, and trees. And basically the study found that the prostrate forms and the shrub forms resprout after fire. We talked about resprouting. And the tree forms regenerate from seed. So you have two modes of operation. So these two forms actually may be genetically distinct. And we certainly found this is the case in the study that our group did on Soralia. Remember this map, and remember this gray area here. Those are the potential areas or areas where rooibos is grown. So what will happen with climate change? So here you have two maps done by Lotte and Lemaitre, and they found on this map here is the average of 5 climate scenarios where they think with climate change by 2070 are the potential areas for rooibos. But what they also found is that most of that gray area I showed you in the previous slide will no longer be suitable for rooibos or redbush cultivation. And it's all going to basically contract, shifting southeastwards and also up the slope because it's a very mountainous region. So that has potential economic potential. So work that started off by Rolf Dahlgren looking at Aspalathus, mapping the species, subsequent people who looked at the genetic aspects have really important long-term applications. I want to now just show you another map. We've looked at that most of the species threatened in the Cape are in this area here. And that's where the highest concentration of species. But this also is one of the hotspots in South Africa for invasive aliens. And you can see some of those that many of you will be familiar with. There are about 10 or 15 Australian acacias that have now naturalized in South Africa, some for commercial purposes and others just as weeds. But it's not only restricted to the acacias, you also have European genistas, a plant from Argentina and another part from Europe spreading along the roadsides, and also prosopis introduced into the drier areas. And of course, lupins, which were widely cultivated to improve the soil, many of them have now escaped, and there are 5 or 6 species that you'll find along roadsides and other areas. Here's just a reminder of this map. And this links me into the next slides of species that have been collected and discovered. And they all illustrate a particular story. This is a species that's not been described yet. I collected with John Rourke in the 1980s. And the forestry department had put a road up into the top of Lamond's Peak, about Grootbosch area. And we were able to drive almost to the top, 400 meters from the top, and we walked the rest. And right at the top, this plant here was the dominant plant, and it's never been collected since. And so it probably survives from the mist that comes in, gets the water, because there's not much soil up there. So that's a case of coming across a plant because accessibility is improved, and it takes about 10 hours to walk up there. Another example is a plant which was originally described as Helia Filiformis by Thunberg, and later on Poire described another species as a Soralia Poire. But the Helia is actually a Soralia. So to make the transfer, you had to, you can't use the name Filiformis because it's already occupied. So I had to create a new name. And I called it Cataracta because it is said to come from Tulba Waterfall. And I thought, look at those long filamentous pedicels. I thought, that's got to float in water. And and I looked in this area for over 40 years and never found it. But one of our PhD students, Brian Dupree, was out collecting indigofras in this area, and he found this species in there, and it's absolutely distinct in the genus, and it's a good species. It was called an aberrant monstrosity by William Harvey, who revised the legumes in the Flora capensis. So here's a good example of looking for a plant in the wrong place that does really truly exist. Here's another example, not collected since 1830, and we found it when we were on our way up to Nieuwoudtville, and we stopped on the Van Reyns Pass. And there are many people who've been up there past, there are 2 picnic sites, one's a third of the way up and one about another ½ kilometer higher. And we'd had our lunch, and I decided to have a walk up the pass. And what did I find? A number of shrubs. I looked closely, and it was flowering, and it was an Athlobium. And I'd never seen this before. And it turns out to be a species last seen and described by Thunberg in 1830 or 1836. And it took a lot of effort to try and find nodules. And just look at that substrate, even collecting soil samples. This is my colleague, Matama Mwasia. Glad to say there were some seedlings surviving in this. So here's an example of an area that's been well traversed by just about every botanist who's ever been up to Nieuwoudtville. Nobody's ever stopped between these two picnic sites. Another example was a plant Elsie Esterhazen collected, and she said it had red flowers. I'd never seen a red flower Soralia, but Elsie being Elsie, a fantastic collector, probably one of the best collectors South Africa's ever had. And we couldn't find out exactly because she just said Delabut Ravine. But Nick Helm, who does a lot of, an ecologist who does a lot of work, and his hobby is to find rare and unusual species, also found it, took some photographs, was published in Felton Flora. And we went back to try and get nodules and material for DNA. And this is what the plant looks like. So if I close that flower, it could be a grass or sedge or anything. And I was walking along, we hadn't found it. We'd spent 4 hours looking for it. And my shoelaces always come undone, anyone who's been on the field trips with me. And I was tying them up and I saw this fruit. And I said, that's a Soralia. So we hunted around and then eventually we found a specimen with 2 flowers. So that was very exciting to rediscover that plant. Here's one found by Nick Helm when he was doing a survey for a new road near Stilby. And there were 3 plants and I studied it and realized this was new, named it after him, and made a comment that this was very rare. In actual fact, 5 or 6 years later, after a great fire, Roy Marlowe, a local resident who I'd been in contact with on a range of things, said, you know, that species you thought was very rare, well, it's covering the mountainside. And here are some of his pictures just showing how widespread it is. And that's what's beautiful about this region of the Cape. You never know what you're going to get. Now, I just want to have a few slides to comment about citizen science. Citizen science is something I've always supported throughout my career, going right back to when I was a professor at University of Natal, Pietermaritzburg campus, as it was known then, and met up with Tony Abbott, a great local farmer enthusiast near Port Edward. And through him and Professor Broom van Wyk in Pretoria, we created Plant Talk, which is a magazine for amateur botanists and horticulturalists. And from those days on, I've always tried to work with amateurs wherever I can. And they've been fantastic for my career and also for helping me solve lots of intractable problems. These slides show various outings that I attended. I just want to say why it's important that professional scientists work with local amateurs. It's because they live there. They're there day in, day out, year after year. They can watch plants grow. They can discover new things. And here's a good example. Nikki, I believe you are logged in. She has been fantastic. She's one of the best legume photographers in South Africa. And she found this species along the coast, just in one population. But since then, we now know it's much more extensive along the coast, and it's very distinctive, and it was named after her, Nikki van Berkel. And then the whole area around, there's a crew group, custodians of rare and endangered species. And this is Diane Turner, who created the OTRAMS group, a crew group, and they've done fantastic work finding species, recording them, counting the number of things, and this was named after her. And then and the next example is Odette Curtis Scott, and Odette sent some specimens when I was working in Cape Town about 6 or 7 years ago, and they were mostly what we call eco scraps, small specimens. And I was looking through them and I came across some leaves and I thought, I've never seen that before. So we met up And she took me out, and we started looking at legumes, and I realized that this was new, named it after her. And from that developed, over time, she created Overberg Lowlands Conservation Trust, of which I was one of the founding members. And recently, you'll see at the end of this talk, a book that we produced, a handbook, which I think is up there with a book done by Jan and Annelies Flock on the Karoo plants, comprehensive books on local regional floras. Anyone who wants to get more involved with the flora of the Cape, I would strongly recommend, or thank for the flora of the whole country, the Botanical Society of South Africa, and you can see the link up there. And I would definitely recommend watching these 3 webinars, and particularly the one on citizen science, where these different aspects and how you can contribute. The other thing is become a local champion for your area. Join a local crew group. If there isn't one in your area, create one. In the end of my talk, I've worked with a lot of students over the last 10 years. I've been an associate with the department, and here are some of them: Meshach, who worked on Soralia, Abubakar Bello, who worked on also on Soralia, a different group, Ntwai Mwale, who worked on Waiborgia, Oscar, who did a lot of the work under Samson Chimpango, and Mark Maestri on the Rhizobia side, Brian Dupuis, who's doing his Indigoffa study, and Simon worked on the physiology of plants, Elowani on sedges, and also Gardia, who worked with Samson, Mark, and Oscar. I would like to thank many people who've worked with me on legumes over the last 2 decades. I hope I haven't left anyone out, but working with people locally, from farmers through to local naturalists, has really made a significant difference. And I reckon that the work, as my work is published, it will be substantially increased and improved by the long associations, collecting material for DNA studies, taking photographs, looking at seasonal changes and variations. There's so much that amateurs can do. Seedling germinations, dispersal strategies, what are visiting the plants. And in such an exciting group. Here's a snapshot of the Cape Legumes Research Group in 2014. But I have a special thanks to Mutama and to Samson Chimpango, who I've worked with since almost 2007, and on a whole range of things about legumes and sedges. And that's where my talk ends. This is the book I was referring to, written by 5 authors, and that's the region there. I'm now keen personally to start looking at legumes on this bit as well. And so we have a coverage for this, because this is such a rich area for legumes. Thank you very much.
Prof, what an amazing talk. I was actually trying to see if I could get something here quickly. This is literally what we call science in action. And I think what you've done with, with your studies, it's just so mind-blowing, because of a lot of the time we think of science as something so complex that not anybody can participate in, not anybody can do, particularly when it comes to iNaturalist. I saw literally a week ago, our crew team at St. Kirstenbosch, brought in a group of school kids, put them in the venue, and we went out onto the field, to look for different things. And it is just so amazing when you see, school kids, you know, getting active and going out into the field and looking for things. And I think that's what we are missing when it comes to science and technology in this country. The practical application that gets everybody moving and wanting to do something. You know, I remember I downloaded an app as well, and with my colleagues at work, we're trying to compete with one another, who's finding more things. And I call this science in action. And I think that's exactly what this country needs in order to you know, to just get, you know, the interest of science up and coming. And can you just tell us a little bit, Prof, just about, you know, just why is this concept so important? Citizen science.
Sorry, can I just, I've got a full screen. I just want to,
my lighting here as well looks like it's not the best today.
That's better.
Yes.
Right. I've just stopped sharing that window because it fills my whole screen and I can't see anything else. And if I can't see people, it's very difficult to talk to them.
Not a problem, bro.
So the question was, what's the importance of citizen science?
Citizen science, yes, Prof.
Well, if you take a country like South Africa, and particularly many developing countries, there are very few scientists to go around. And given South Africa, which is phenomenal diversity, well over 20,000 species, and the Cape being one of the floral kingdoms, it's quite extraordinary that, for example, the Department of Nature, the Cape Department of Nature Conservation, does not have a botanist.
Wow.
I will say that again. Cape Nature does not have a botanist. It was Rupert Koopman, and he then became, I think, CEO of the Botanical Society, and he's not been replaced. We're talking about, this is almost, to me, I can say this because I'm old enough to say, and also I just think such a rich environment, and there isn't a botanist. Fortunately, in the Eastern Cape, they got people like Annelies Flock, who's heavily involved with things, who is a botanist. But for the Cape Core region, where's a botanist in the department that's supposed to look after our environment? So this is where the role of people who go out with crew, who are involved in some of the South African National Biodiversity Institutes, other activities in education and so on, and encouraging young people is really, really crucial. And that is something like iNaturalist, working with crew, because everybody goes on crew, ends up putting pictures on iNaturalist.
Yeah.
And the beauty is, you are then actually getting experts in those particular groups from all over the world naming it. I've had insects named from people in Hungary, Brazil, North America, because we have very few insect taxonomists in South Africa. So it's this relationship, and I would like to see more professional taxonomists in South Africa to become more involved with the local crew groups, to take their students on. We have a tradition that we encourage our postgrad students to go out with crew. And as both Rupert and Ishmael Ibrahim will say, we've contributed, but we've learned so much more. It's not a one-way thing. And then to encourage farmers to get, that's one of the things we're doing in the Overberg Lowlands Conservation Trust, is working with farmers to protect areas. So I think it's a huge role, and this needs support.
Sure. Well, I can tell you without a shadow of doubt that with my device here, I endeavor to have one of the plants named after me. I can just see it. I can see my name on a plant somewhere. So I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to become a citizen scientist and I'm going to make it happen, Prof. So
I'm going to be watching to see when you come on, and I will encourage you.
Ladies and gentlemen, iNaturalist is a social network of naturalists, citizen science, and biologists built on the concept of mapping and sharing observations of biodiversity across the globe. iNaturalist may be accessed via its website or from its mobile application. In fact, on all our posters, we've left a link on our social media pages, on our Facebook pages, Straight Nature, as well as Kirstenbosch National Botanical Facebook page. There's a link particularly linked to this particular talk, which will take you straight onto that. And Prof, we're also gonna literally ask individuals to Google you. And I'm sure by just Googling Prof, you'll also get amazing wealth of information, all the things that you can get. In fact, from our chat here, we've shared some links where you can get yourself involved and see what's going on. So there's a wealth of information out there. Prof, we're just about to wrap up, but I just want to take two or three questions quickly from our attendees on the call today. Let me start with this one. I think it's from Mr. Sleber or Ms. Sleber. I beg your pardon if I'm getting that wrong. It says, do legumes prefer low phosphorus soils because they do not need P, or does high phosphorus presence undermine the symbiosis between legumes and pea scavings, microbiomes, or fungi? Hey, Prof, this is a very high level English for me. Yeah?
Put very simply, in the Cape, we have legumes distributed across sandstone, Table Mountain sandstone, which is low in phosphorus. So those legumes, those bacteria, rhizobia, have enabled to create nitrogen in those situations. You find a lot of those have very narrow leaves, so whatever materials they produce, they try and conserve. The shale and other areas are very rich in clays, and so they have lots of nutrients. But Burkholderia, for example, is perfectly adapted and is dominant in those groups in the high mountains, in the Table Mountain sandstone. And legumes are very clever. For example, aspalathus, I can put it this way. The plant will grow up and it'll send out the root systems going like this. And every now and again, they will just put a section of root and they will put millions, or maybe hundreds of thousands of little root hairs. And then they've got a deep taproot, and then they will bring water from low, flush it there. That water will go out in those hairs and they will suck up all the phosphorus. And then they will extend again and find more phosphorus somewhere else, because phosphorus is very low and it's a crucial element. So that's an adaptation. If you want to find these hairs, sometimes you've got to stay in a concentric circle around the plant. As the plant moves, these little flushes, so sucking water up, flush it out, and then absorb all the. So there are a lot of adaptations, and that's a whole talk in itself. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because we definitely need to call you back again. You're sharing such interesting stuff with us. A lot of comments just from the chat, individuals saying thank you so much. A lot of individuals asking if this will be recorded and shared. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been recorded and is being currently shared on YouTube. And we will also be sharing it on our social media pages. For any other questions that we may have missed, please feel free to just leave those questions. We'll send them to Prof and ask Prof to perhaps assist us with the answers, and we'll definitely come back to you. Prof, let me take one more question that I saw from our Q&A. In fact, there's a couple of them now. From Gail, she says, thank you for a great talk. Do you know what...
Piece of cake?
Yes.
Yes. No, I don't. But the person to ask will be Jan Vlok,
Yeah.
who knows everything about Karoo plants, and I'm sure it's a Karoo plant. And you can always message Vlok, who's on iNaturalist, which is his wife underneath.
Oh, all right.
And
all
on
right,
that, if anyone wants to ask me any question or any follow-up, you can contact me via iNaturalist on the messaging. There's a messaging thing you can do there. And I have had people from the strangest places asking me interesting questions.
Prof, I feel like I'll be one of those people that will be just sending messages. You'll be like, oh, this amateur, you know, sending me these questions that they can Google up. But let me take one more question, Prof. Quickly, for everybody that's on the line. This is from Esther. She says, hi, Prof. I'm not a botanist, and I love that because of, I love that just disclaimer. Call me an interest in everything, citizen. Who likes to take photographs of all kinds of interesting flowering plants and fauna while traveling all over the globe. I would love to add some photographs to the Southern Africa Faberkeys project on iNaturalist, but I have no idea how to classify them. Can I provide photos, locations, and dates? I hope this will be of value, or what's your recommendation there?
Well, the best thing is join iNaturalist. If she hasn't joined already. And then if you load things up there, I regularly go through the South African legumes, but you know, a lot of people are loading up, so sometimes it takes a bit of time, and I tend to do a genus at a time because that's a much more efficient way of doing it. And if I know a name or I can make a suggestion, and particularly when people are starting out, often they just take a general picture, or they say, this is this, and you can see it on the hill. It could be anything. Or it's a nice shot, but it's totally out of focus. So before you load anything up, look at it on your screen. And if you can't see it from 18 or say 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters away, and it's not in focus, please don't put it on iNaturalist, because it means somebody has to spend time looking at it, and it could be a really critical record. As many, there have some that have been there that I just wish they'd taken a thing in focus, because it was the only known photo ever taken of that organism. So quality is really important. And if you're going to take a legume, a picture from the front of a flower, the side of the flower is the most critical, and a close-up of a detached leaf, a habit shot, and a habitat. Those four things can name most legumes. Leave those out, and it becomes very difficult.
Beautiful, Prof. I think all this, you know, I don't know whether to call it exhibitions, you know, that you got, they make you, you know, they keep you nice and young. So we encourage you to keep going, because you look like a 30-year-old something or 20-year-old something. So,
well, I was saying the other day, I wish I was only 20, because the technology that's available today, I used to do maps from letterpress, and I had to take and develop all my own photographs. Now, it's just unbelievable what youngsters can do. So revel in it, because it's a real opportunity. And it's amazing what you can do in your backyard. You may not think it's important, but if you looked at that map I showed, that whole interior of the Cape, you know, the Cape provinces is empty. People are not taking photographs there. And those are actually really important.
Yeah, sure. Prof, citizen science in action. I'm determined. I'm getting my name up there on the leaderboard. For everybody that's on the call this morning, please remember, everybody that's registered on the call, in fact, your extended family members that may have missed this amazing talk, remember that we've got a 15% discount on field guides to the Rosenfeld of the Overberg at Kirstenbosch Botanical a society bookshop in the garden, or you can even shop online. With this 15%, literally, the price I think was sitting at around 450. We're looking at around just 300 odd. So please go out there. The offer is valid for the next coming week. So please go out there, get yourself this amazing book, get yourself registered on iNaturalist, download the app, and go out and just become a citizen scientist. I'm calling myself a scientist from now on, and I don't care who says what. And Prof, with your advice, I'm gonna try my best to take the best looking photo that I possibly can, so that I can make my contribution. But with that, we don't want to keep everybody for too long on the call. Thank you everybody for joining us. Let me take this opportunity to thank all our stakeholders that has made this call possible, this presentation possible by Prof. Straight Nature. Thank you so much for putting this together, Belinda and the team. Thank you to Kathy Abbott, who goes out of her way to find this amazing speakers. Kathy, we love you always. So thank you, and keep up the awesome work that you continue to do. Room to Grow. If you're looking to get your landscaping going, please go check them out. And from our side, Kirsten Bosch, thank you. We want to encourage everybody to keep safe. Remember to keep a safe social distancing. Remember to wear your mask. And most importantly, let's support the government initiatives. Let's register, let's get vaccinated so that we can protect one another. But that's about it from myself. Prof, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. This is one of the talks I've been looking forward to. Like I said, I'm on the leaderboard and I want my name up there. So thank you very much. Any last words from you, Prof?
Just thank you for the opportunity. And nature's out there. It's very exciting. It's very important for our health, and it gets us involved. We've got a planet to protect. We've got people to protect. And by looking after a planet, we protect people. Go for it. Become a local champion.
Beautiful. I couldn't have summed it up better myself. Thank you, everybody. Until we meet again in the next 2 weeks. And Prof, we definitely want to reach out to you because we need you to continue with this talk. We need to do a second follow-up of this presentation. Everybody else, thank you very much. Have a fantastic day, and we will see you guys soon. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much. Cheers, everyone.